On February 11th, 2013, the Catholic world was stunned. In a small gathering of cardinals inside the Vatican, Pope Benedict XVI, soft-spoken, reserved, dressed in white, read a simple statement in Latin. At first, many didn't even understand what was happening. But then, the realization spread like wildfire. The Pope was resigning. It hadn't happened in nearly 6 centuries. The last time a pope stepped down voluntarily was in 1415, when Gregory the Untold resigned to end a schism in the Church. For modern Catholics, it was unthinkable. Popes didn't resign. They served until death. That was the tradition. Yet Benedict XVI, the 85-year-old theologian, did something extraordinary. He looked at the weight of his office, at the demands of leading over 1 billion Catholics, and at his own failing strength, and he chose humility over power. He stepped aside, not out of scandal, not out of defeat, but out of love for the Church. Some saw it as shocking, even destabilizing. Others saw it as the ultimate act of courage. For the first time in modern history, the papacy was redefined, not as a throne for life, but as a mission of service, one that could be laid down when no longer possible to carry out faithfully. But who was Benedict XVI before that unforgettable moment? Was he only the Pope who resigned? Or was there much more to this quiet, brilliant man whose writings shaped theology, whose voice warned the world about the dangers of relativism, and whose heart longed above all else to show that God is love? This is the story of Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, a farm boy from Bavaria who became one of the greatest theological minds of his generation, the guardian of Catholic truth, the reluctant pope, and the man whose humility reshaped the very idea of the papacy. Joseph Aloysius Ratzinger, born in Bavaria, Germany in 1927, would one day become Pope Benedict XVI, the 265th successor of St. Peter. His papacy lasted from 2000 until his resignation in 2013. Though only 8 years long, his time as Pope was filled with deep theological reflection, historic speeches, and one final act of humility that forever changed the papacy. Before his election as Pope, Ratzinger was already world-famous in Catholic circles. He was a brilliant theologian, a professor, a participant in the Second Vatican Council, and later, the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the Vatican's powerful guardian of orthodoxy. Some admired him as a defender of truth. Others criticized him as too rigid, calling him God's Rottweiler. Yet when he became Pope in 2005, following the death of John Paul II, he surprised many. Instead of a harsh enforcer, people encountered a gentle, shy, almost introverted man who preferred books to microphones, prayer to politics, and truth spoken softly to crowds rather than thundered from balconies. His papal name, Benedict, was chosen to honor both Saint Benedict, the father of Western monasticism, and Benedict XVI, the Pope of Peace during World War I. It was a clue to his vision, a church rooted in prayer, in tradition, in peace, and in dialogue with reason. During his papacy, Benedict XVI emphasized 3 great themes: the need for truth in a world of relativism, the beauty of faith and reason working together, and the centrality of God's love. His first encyclical, Deus Caritas Est, God is Love, set the tone. It wasn't about rules or condemnations, but about the heart of Christianity itself, love. But history rarely remembers a pope only for his writings. His papacy also faced great storms: the global financial crisis, the rise of secularism, the painful revelations of abuse, scandals within the Church. Through it all, Benedict tried to point the Church back to Christ, even as critics doubted him. And then came 2013. His resignation shocked the world, but it also revealed who Benedict truly was: a man who never sought power, who never clung to authority, but who lived as a humble servant of the faith. So, who was Benedict XVI really? To answer that, we need to travel back to his childhood in war-torn Germany, trace his rise as a scholar and theologian, and walk through the key moments of his papacy. Only then can we see why his legacy is not just about stepping down, but about showing the world that true greatness lies in truth, in love, and in humility. Joseph Aloysius Ratzinger was born on April 16, 1927, in the small Bavarian village of Marktal am Inn, Germany. His father was a police officer, a strict but fair man, and his mother worked as a cook. Joseph was the youngest of 3 children, raised in a devout Catholic family that cherished their faith even in the midst of political turmoil. Growing up in Germany during the rise of Adolf Hitler was no easy experience. The Ratzinger family quietly opposed the Nazi regime, which often put them at risk. Joseph's father, in particular, was outspoken against Nazi ideology, and young Joseph saw firsthand how dangerous it was to live with integrity during those years. As a boy, Joseph loved music. He learned to play the piano, and Mozart became his lifelong favorite composer. He often said that music lifted his soul toward God. But alongside music, Joseph developed a passion for study. He was a bright, sensitive child, drawn to books, to prayer, and to the intellectual world of faith. During World War II, like many German youths, Joseph was enrolled in the Hitler Youth by force. It was mandatory. But he participated only minimally, and his family's opposition to the Nazis never wavered. Later in the war, he was drafted into the German army and served briefly in an anti-aircraft unit. Near the end of the war, he deserted, risking his life to return home. When American troops arrived in Bavaria, Joseph was briefly detained as a prisoner of war, but he was soon released. After the war, he entered seminary with his brother Georg, who would also become a priest. In 1951, both Joseph and Georg were ordained together. That day marked the beginning of Joseph's lifelong mission to serve the Church through teaching, writing, and guiding others in faith. As a young priest, Ratzinger pursued advanced studies in theology. His doctoral dissertation focused on the theology of St. Augustine, exploring how the Church is the people of God united in love. Later, his habilitation thesis examined Saint Bonaventure, a medieval thinker who emphasized the role of history and revelation. These works showed Ratzinger's deep commitment to connecting ancient wisdom with the challenges of modern times. By the late 1950s, he had become one of the youngest professors of theology in Germany. His lectures were famous for their clarity and depth. Students described him as brilliant but humble, a man whose sharp intellect was always paired with gentleness. He wasn't just an academic. He was a priest who prayed, who cared, and who saw theology not as abstract theory, but as a way to encounter God. In 1962, at just 35 years old, Ratzinger was invited as a theological advisor to the Second Vatican Council. There, he quickly gained recognition as a progressive voice, eager to help the Church engage with the modern world. He worked alongside influential cardinals and theologians, shaping key documents on revelation, liturgy, and the Church's role in the world. His fingerprints were on some of the most important reforms of Vatican II. But as the years passed, Ratzinger became concerned about how some interpreted Vatican II. He saw movements that, in his view, went too far, distorting the Council's intent and risking the loss of Catholic identity. By the late 1960s, as student revolutions and radical theologies spread, Ratzinger shifted. He was no longer seen as a progressive, but as a careful guardian of tradition. In 1977, Pope Paul VI appointed him Archbishop of Munich, and soon after made him a cardinal. It was in Munich that Ratzinger experienced firsthand the challenges of being a shepherd, not just a scholar. He had to lead priests and laity, face the growing tide of secularism, and hold together a church in tension. Then, in 1981, Pope John Paul II called Cardinal Ratzinger to Rome as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the Vatican office charged with defending Catholic teaching. For the next 24 years, Ratzinger became one of the most powerful figures in the Church. To admirers, he was the faithful watchdog of orthodoxy. To critics, he was the enforcer, earning nicknames like God's Rottweiler. Yet those who worked closely with him often saw a different man, gentle, shy, deeply spiritual, and devoted to truth. He never sought the spotlight. He once admitted he longed to retire quietly to his books, to write and pray in peace, but history would not let him. In 2005, after the death of John Paul II, Joseph Ratzinger was elected pope. The reluctant scholar became Benedict XVI. When Joseph Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI in April 2005, many wondered what kind of leader he would be. Following the towering figure of John Paul II was no easy task. John Paul had been charismatic, loved by crowds, a global traveler. Benedict, by contrast, was shy, academic, more comfortable in a library than in a stadium. Some doubted whether he could ever fill the shoes of his predecessor. But in his own quiet way, Benedict XVI made lasting contributions through his writings, his teachings, and one courageous decision that changed the papacy forever. 1. The theology of truth in a world of relativism. One of Benedict's central themes was the defense of truth. From the very beginning of his pontificate, he warned against what he called the dictatorship of relativism. In a famous homily just before the conclave that elected him, he declared, "We are moving toward a dictatorship of relativism, which does not recognize anything as definitive, and whose ultimate goal consists solely of one's own ego and desires." For Benedict, truth was not just an abstract concept, it was the foundation of freedom. Without truth, society would collapse into chaos, guided only by opinion and power. His message was not popular in a culture that increasingly celebrated individual choice above all else. But Benedict stood firm, reminding the world that Christianity is not a set of shifting opinions, but a living encounter with Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. This insistence on truth shaped everything he wrote and taught. He invited believers to resist the temptation to water down the gospel to fit modern tastes. Instead, he called them to embrace the fullness of faith, even when it was challenging. 2. Faith and reason. Together. Another great theme of Benedict's pontificate was the harmony of faith and reason. As a scholar, he believed deeply that reason and faith were not enemies, but partners. He often pointed to the roots of Western civilization in both Greek philosophy and Christian revelation. In 2006, he gave his famous Regensburg lecture in Germany, where he argued that faith divorced from reason becomes dangerous, while reason cut off from faith becomes empty. Though the lecture stirred controversy, particularly over a quotation about Islam, its core message was timeless. True faith respects reason, and true reason must remain open to God. Benedict's emphasis on faith and reason was not academic theory. In a world tempted by both fundamentalism and skepticism, he offered a vision of balance, where science and religion, intellect and spirit could walk hand in hand. 3. Deus caritas est. God is love. Benedict's very first encyclical, published in 2005, surprised many. Instead of focusing on rules or doctrine, it was titled Deus caritas est. God is love. It reflected his conviction that Christianity is, at its heart, not an ideology, but a relationship with a God who loves us. He wrote, Being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but the encounter with an event, a person, which gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction. This focus on love became a hallmark of his teaching. He reminded Catholics that the faith was not primarily about prohibitions, but about the joy of encountering Christ's love and sharing that love with the world. Later, his encyclicals Spe Salvi, on Christian hope, and Caritas in Veritate, charity and truth, continued this theme, applying it to social issues, economics, and global justice. 4. Champion of the liturgy. Benedict XVI was often called the Pope of the liturgy. He had a profound love for the Mass and the beauty of Catholic worship. He believed that the way we pray shapes the way we believe. In 2007, he issued a document called Summorum Pontificum, which made it easier for Catholics to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass. His goal was not to divide the Church, but to reconcile and preserve the richness of tradition. He wanted the old and new forms of the liturgy to enrich one another, so that the Church could worship with both continuity and renewal. For Benedict, the liturgy was never about personal taste. It was about encountering the mystery of God. He often said that in the liturgy, heaven touches earth. 5. Interreligious dialogue and ecumenism. Though sometimes seen as conservative, Benedict XVI reached out in dialogue to other Christians and other religions. He worked to heal the wounds of division with the Orthodox Church, meeting with Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople. He also visited synagogues and mosques, emphasizing respect and dialogue. One memorable moment was his visit to the Blue Mosque in Istanbul in 2006, where he paused in silent prayer facing Mecca. It was a gesture of humility that moved many Muslims around the world. 6. Facing the abuse crisis. One of the greatest challenges of Benedict's papacy was the sexual abuse crisis within the Church. Scandals erupted around the world, shaking the faith of millions. Critics accused the Vatican of covering up abuse for decades. Benedict took steps to confront this painful reality. As Pope, he met personally with survivors, listened to their stories, and expressed shame and sorrow. He strengthened church laws to remove abusive priests and insisted that bishops take responsibility. While some felt he did not go far enough, many historians note that Benedict was the first pope to seriously confront the issue. Long before his papacy, as head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, he had already pushed for stronger action. 7. A pope of humility. The resignation of all his contributions, the most historic, came at the end. On February 11, 2013, Benedict announced his resignation. He said, "After having repeatedly examined my conscience before God, I have come to the certainty that my strengths, due to an advanced age, are no longer suited to an adequate exercise of the Petrine ministry." It was a moment of shock. Popes simply did not resign. But Benedict saw it differently. For him, the papacy was not a throne to cling to, but a mission of service. When he no longer had the strength to serve well, he chose to step aside. This act redefined the papacy. It showed the world that humility is stronger than pride, that service matters more than power. For many, it was Benedict's greatest lesson. Legacy of a teacher. Throughout his life, Benedict XVI remained, above all, a teacher. He wrote over 60 books, countless essays, and 3 major encyclicals. His Jesus of Nazareth trilogy remains a landmark, blending scholarship and faith in a way accessible to ordinary readers. Even after his resignation, he lived quietly in the Vatican gardens, praying and writing. He became the first Pope Emeritus in modern history, no longer leading the Church, but still serving it through prayer. Benedict XVI's contributions were not flashy. He wasn't a globe-trotting celebrity like John Paul II. He didn't command crowds with charisma, but he gave the church something just as valuable: clarity of thought, depth of theology, and a powerful example of humility. What makes Pope Benedict XVI's story so powerful is not only what he did, but how he lived. Behind the titles, the books, and the papal garments was a man of striking humility, a quiet soul who never wanted the spotlight, but carried it because the church asked him to. One of the most revealing insights into Benedict's character was his relationship with truth. For him, truth was not something to be bent or reshaped according to popular opinion. Truth was liberating, a light in the darkness. Even when people mocked him for being too rigid, he saw fidelity to truth as the most compassionate act, because only truth can set people free. Another insight lies in his love for beauty. Benedict believed that beauty itself is a path to God. He often spoke about how sacred music and art open the heart to transcendence. His devotion to Mozart wasn't just a personal taste, it was a window into his theology. For him, the harmony of music reflected the harmony of creation, and to encounter beauty was to encounter a glimpse of God's eternal love. But perhaps the deepest insight of all came in his resignation. In a world obsessed with power, control, and image, Benedict did something radically different. He let go. His resignation was not a sign of weakness, but of extraordinary strength. He showed that leadership is not about clinging to authority, but about serving faithfully and knowing when to step aside. This is a lesson for all of us, far beyond the walls of the Vatican. True greatness is not measured by how long we hold on, but by how willing we are to put others before ourselves. In Benedict's humility, we see the paradox of Christian leadership. When you lose yourself, you truly find yourself. When you step down, you lift others up. In the end, Benedict XVI's insights remind us that faith is not about noise or spectacle, but about depth. It's about truth, beauty, and love lived quietly but faithfully, a legacy that continues to inspire even after his passing. Pope Benedict XVI's legacy is a tapestry woven from intellect, faith, and humility. He was not the kind of pope who drew headlines with dramatic gestures or world tours. Instead, his gift to the church was clarity of thought, theological depth, and the courage to live what he taught. For some, he will always be remembered as the theologian pope, the brilliant mind who defended truth against relativism, who reminded the world that faith and reason belong together, and who placed love at the center of Christian life. His writings, especially Deus Caritas Est and the Jesus of Nazareth trilogy, will continue to nourish generations of believers. For others, his most enduring legacy will be his resignation, the quiet but earth-shaking moment when he stepped down, showing that the papacy is not about clinging to power, but about serving the people of God with integrity. By laying down the keys of St. Peter, Benedict XVI gave the Church a final homily, preached not with words, but with his life. Humility is the highest form of leadership, and for many who knew him personally, or who read his gentle words, he will be remembered simply as a man of prayer. Even after resigning, he spent nearly a decade living in the Vatican gardens, praying daily for the Church, never seeking attention, never interfering, simply being faithful to his call until the end. When Benedict XVI passed away on December 31st, 2022, tributes poured in from across the world. Some praised his intellectual brilliance, others his courage, but many spoke of his humility. His life reminds us that the greatest leaders are not those who shout the loudest, but those who quietly point us back to God. In the end, Benedict XVI leaves us with this enduring lesson. Faith is not a burden, but a joy. Truth is not restrictive, but liberating. And love, above all else, is the heart of Christianity. His papacy may be remembered as quiet compared to others, but its echoes will resound for centuries. Now I'd like to hear from you. How do you see Pope Benedict XVI? Do you remember him as the brilliant theologian who defended faith and reason, or as the humble servant who shocked the world by resigning? Maybe for you, he was above all a quiet man of prayer who simply wanted to point us toward Christ. His life leaves us with so much to reflect on: truth, beauty, humility, courage. And I wonder, which of these lessons speaks to you most deeply today? If this story gave you a new perspective on the papacy and on Benedict XVI, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with a friend who might also find inspiration in his life. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We have so many more stories of the popes to uncover together, and each one holds wisdom for our own journey of faith. Stay with us, and let's keep discovering the men in white who shaped not just the Catholic Church, but the history of the entire world. If you found the story of Pope Benedict XVI moving, then you won't want to miss our next episode. We'll journey into the life of Pope Pius IX, the longest reigning pope in history, who guided the Church through the 19th century, declared the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, and presided over the First Vatican Council. But his reign was also filled with controversy, political battles, and the dramatic loss of the Papal States. Was he a steadfast defender of faith, or a symbol of resistance to modernity? Join us next time as we uncover the life of Pope Pius IX, a story of tradition, turmoil, and transformation at the heart of the Catholic Church.